On a cold October night in East Point, Georgia, when rain was coming down hard enough to turn the streetlights into trembling gold ribbons on the pavement, a self-made billionaire stepped through the door of a little restaurant with a broken sign. And nobody inside knew that one woman's life was about to change forever. It was October 11th, 2017, and 67-year-old Naomi Carter was standing in the kitchen of Magnolia's table, doing math in her head that refused to become good news. She owed $3,500 in back rent. She had 20 days to pay it. There was $742 in the restaurant account, a past due electric bill folded under the register, a supplier waiting on payment, and a 12-year-old granddaughter named Lena who needed a specialist Naomi could not afford. Outside, the sign above the door flickered in the rain. One letter had burned out weeks ago, so Magnolia's table no longer looked whole from the street. It read more like Magnolia's table, a wounded version of the name Samuel Carter had chosen 10 years earlier when he and Naomi opened the place with 2 used ovens, 12 mismatched tables, and a dream big enough to make them both foolish and brave. Naomi kept meaning to fix that letter. Every morning, when she unlocked the door before sunrise, she looked up at it and told herself, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll call somebody. Tomorrow I'll get that fixed." He used to say that a sign was a promise made from the sidewalk, and if the promise looked tired, people might walk right past the blessing waiting inside. Magnolia's table sat on a narrow stretch of road not far from Main Street, tucked between a closed barber shop and a laundromat that hummed late into the night. It was not fancy. It had 12 tables, a counter with 3 stools, a chalkboard menu written in Naomi's careful hand, and a kitchen so small that 2 people could not pass each other without one of them turning sideways. But people came there because the food tasted like somebody had thought about them before they arrived. They came for pork ribs glazed with peppery onion gravy, collard greens cooked low and slow, macaroni and cheese thick enough to make a tired man close his eyes, and cornbread with edges crisp from the skillet and a center soft as Sunday morning. Truck drivers came after late routes. Nurses came after double shifts. Church ladies came after choir practice. Men who had not called their mothers in months came in, ate Naomi's food, and suddenly remembered they should. But that night, the dining room was almost empty. Rain had a way of making people stay home, unless they were lonely, hungry, or both. At table 2, an older couple shared 1 plate of fried catfish and 2 cups of coffee. At the counter, a young delivery driver in a soaked hoodie ate fast, like the weather had chased him in and might chase him back out. Near the window, Mrs. Alberta Jenkins, who had lived 3 blocks away since before Naomi was born, stirred sugar into her tea, even though the tea was already sweet enough to forgive sins. Naomi loved them all, but love did not pay rent. 4 customers on a Wednesday night did not pay rent. A good recipe did not pay rent unless enough people sat down and ordered it. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked again at the notebook beside the stove. The numbers sat there plain and cruel. Rent owed, $3,500. Deadline, October 31st. Restaurant account, $742. Electric bill, $191. Produce order, $163. Meat supplier, $217. Lena's next appointment deposit, $300 minimum. Due before they would even put the child on the calendar. Naomi stared at the page until the ink seemed to darken. She had done the math 6 times already. There was no version where it worked. Even if the church luncheon on the 22nd paid in full, even if the catering order for Mrs. Coleman's memorial brought in what they promised, even if nobody's check bounced, even if the freezer did not finally die with that awful rattling cough it had been making for 3 weeks, Naomi would still be short. She closed the notebook and pressed her palm on top of it, as if she could hold the bad news down. Samuel stood beside her in a brown suit. He had no business wearing, while holding a paintbrush, his arm around her waist, his eyes proud, in the way only a man's eyes can be proud when he has built something with the woman he loves. Behind them, the sign was new then. Every letter worked. Magnolia's table glowed clean and bright above their heads. Samuel had built the front counter himself. He had sanded the tabletops in their garage. He had measured the kitchen shelves and marked the supply closet wall in pencil. And those pencil marks were still there because Naomi could not bring herself to paint over his handwriting. Samuel had been gone 2 years now. Stroke. Sudden. One ordinary Tuesday morning, he had been pouring coffee into a travel mug and reminding Naomi to order more smoked paprika. By that afternoon, the world had become a place where his shoes were still by the back door, but his feet would never fill them again. People told Naomi she was strong. She hated that word sometimes. Strong was what people called you when they did not know what else to say about the fact that you had no choice. After Samuel died, Naomi learned the business parts of the business the hard way. He had always handled vendor terms, insurance forms, taxes, rent talks, repairs, and the quiet little negotiations that keep a small restaurant alive. Naomi had handled food, people, timing, taste, memory. She knew when greens needed another hour by the smell of the pot. She knew when a customer wanted conversation and when they needed to be left alone. Then she picked up and turned slightly toward the wall, away from the dining room. "Evening, Walter," she said. "Naomi," he said, and the way he said her name told her everything before he said anything else. He sounded tired, not angry. That was almost worse. Anger could be pushed back against. Tired meant a man had already done the math too. She looked through the pass window at the dining room. Mrs. Jenkins was watching rain slide down the glass. The delivery driver was scraping the last of his mac and cheese from the plate. Nobody was listening, but Naomi lowered her voice anyway. "I was going to call you Friday," she said. "I know," Walter said, "and I wish I could give you until Friday to call me, but I got another call this afternoon." Naomi closed her eyes. Walter kept going. "There's a company looking at the strip, Quick Fix Wireless. They want your unit and the old barber shop next door. They're talking first and last, plus 6 months up front if I move fast." Naomi gripped the edge of the prep table. "Walter, I know." "No, you don't know. Not like I know." Her voice stayed low, but the words came out sharper than she meant them to. She softened them before he could answer. "I'm sorry. I know you've been patient." "I have been patient, Naomi. 3 months patient. I know every dollar." "It's $3,500. I said I know." There was a silence. Rain tapped the back door. The fryer hissed softly, though nothing was in it. Naomi could hear Walter breathing through the phone. He was not a cruel man. That was the trouble. If he had been cruel, she could have hated him and made the whole thing simple. "I can bring you part of it after the church luncheon," Naomi said. They booked 40 plates, maybe 45 if Pastor Green's cousins come, like they always do. And Mrs. Coleman's family ordered food for the memorial. That's real money, Walter. I just need time for the money to become money. "Naomi, I got a note from the bank last week." She opened her eyes and looked at Samuel's picture. Walter said, "I can't carry everybody. I wish I could, but I can't." The words landed quietly, which somehow made them heavier. "How long?" she asked. "I need the full amount by the end of the month." "October 31st? "Yes, that's 20 days. "I know." "Walter, That place next door has been empty for 9 months. You're telling me after 10 years, I get 20 days? I'm telling you, I already gave you more than I could afford to give. Naomi swallowed. Her pride rose first, hot and useless. She wanted to say she had never missed rent when Samuel was alive. She wanted to say that when Walter's wife died, she had sent over 3 trays of food and refused payment. She wanted to say that Magnolia's table had fed half this neighborhood, including people who had no money and promised to come back Friday and sometimes never did. But none of that was rent. None of that changed the number. So she said, the only thing she had left, please don't turn my husband's dream into a phone repair shop. Walter did not answer right away. Naomi hated that she had said it, not because it was untrue, but because it was too true. It came from a place she tried not to let people see. Finally, Walter said, Naomi, if you bring me $3,500 by October 31st, we keep going. Same lease, same terms. I'll tell Quick Fix they need to wait, but if you don't, I have to move forward. I'm sorry. That is the best I can do. She nodded, even though he could not see her. Thank you, she said. He sighed. I really am sorry. I know. The call ended. Naomi kept the phone pressed against her ear for several seconds after the line went dead. Then she lowered it slowly and set it on the prep table. The kitchen seemed too bright all of a sudden. The pots, the pans, the spice jars, the old mixer Samuel had found second-hand and repaired twice. All of it stood around her like witnesses. 20 days. She opened the notebook again, because pain sometimes makes people repeat the thing that hurt them, as if the second look might change it. Rent owed, $3,500. Account, 742's, 20 days. She added the church luncheon, the memorial catering, the money she might make if the weather cleared and business picked up. She subtracted food costs. She subtracted Lena's appointment. She subtracted electricity because a restaurant without lights is just a dark room with chairs. Still short, not a little short, not almost. Short enough that Hope felt irresponsible. From the dining room, Mrs. Jenkins called, Naomi, baby, you got any more of that peach cobbler? Naomi closed the notebook, fixed her face, and turned toward the window. For you, Miss Alberta, I might find some, she called back. Her voice sounded normal. That was one of the skills life had taught her. How to sound normal while the floor under you is giving way. She plated the cobbler herself, warmed it just enough, added a small scoop of vanilla ice cream, even though Mrs. Jenkins had not paid for ice cream, and carried it out with a smile. The dining room smelled of coffee, rain-damp coats, pepper gravy, and old wood. For a moment, looking at the people still sitting there, Naomi could almost pretend the numbers in the notebook were just numbers, not a deadline, not a verdict. Mrs. Jenkins took one bite of cobbler and closed her eyes. Lord, Naomi, Samuel would fuss at you for making this better than his. Naomi's smile flickered. Samuel would fuss if the sun came up 2 minutes late. He loved this place. Yes, Naomi said. He did. She went back behind the counter before the old woman could see what that sentence did to her. At 8:02 p.m., her daughter Denise called. Naomi almost did not answer. She already knew what kind of night it was, and she was afraid there was only room for one more piece of bad news before she broke. But Denise never called during her second shift unless it mattered. Mama, Denise said when Naomi answered. Her voice was low and strained. Lena's hurting again. Naomi turned toward the wall for the second time that night. How bad? She says it's a 6, but you know how she is. If she says 6, it's 8. Naomi pressed 2 fingers to her forehead. Did she take the medicine? Yes, it helped some, but she cried getting up from the couch. She tried to hide it from me. Of course she did. Lena was 12 years old and already learning the same terrible art the women in her family had mastered too young. How to be in pain, politely. What about the clinic? Naomi asked. They said the specialist can see her next Thursday if we pay the deposit first. How much? Denise hesitated. Denise, $300 to hold the appointment. More after, depending on what they do. Naomi looked down at her apron. There was flour near the pocket, a streak of gravy by her hip, and a tiny burn mark from a pan she had grabbed too quickly last week. She thought of Lena, all long arms and bright eyes, drawing pictures of herself, running even on days when walking to the bathroom made her bite her lip. She thought of the appointment. She thought of Walter Briggs. She thought of 20 days. I'll find it, Naomi said. Mama, you always say that. And I always do. There was a small sound on the line, not quite a laugh, and not quite a sob. You can't keep pulling money out of smoke. I've been doing it long enough to know smoke has corners. Mama, listen to me. Do not borrow from anybody at that warehouse. Not those payday people. Not anybody who says they can get you cash tonight. You hear me? Denise was quiet. Naomi's voice sharpened. Denise, I hear you. That kind of help puts chains on your ankles. I know. No, you know because I told you. I know because I've seen it. Denise exhaled. I'm just scared. Naomi shut her eyes. The words touched something soft and bruised in her. Me too, baby. She had not meant to say it. Not out loud. Not to her daughter. Mothers were supposed to be the wall, not the crack in it. Denise's voice changed. Mama, Naomi straightened. But scared doesn't mean done. Kiss Lena for me. Tell her grandma's making cornbread tomorrow and she gets the corner piece. That'll make her smile. Good, then do it twice. They ended the call. Naomi stood still, a long moment, the phone in her hand. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to lay her head on the counter and sleep for a year. She wanted Samuel to walk through the back door, smelling like rain and motor oil. Take the notebook, squint at the numbers, and say, now, baby, it ain't good, but it ain't the grave. He had always known how to make disaster sound like a problem with handles. But Samuel did not come through the back door. The freezer groaned again. The sign outside flickered. Jenkins looked toward the door and forgot to stir her tea. The older man at table 2 leaned back slightly, as if making room for the size of what had entered. A shadow fell across the front tiles. Naomi looked through the pass window. A man stood just inside the doorway, shaking rain from the shoulders of a dark wool coat. He was tall, broad, and carried himself with the quiet heaviness of someone who had spent the day being listened to by people who wanted something from him. He did not have an entourage, no assistant, no bodyguard, no camera, no polished smile prepared for strangers. Just a man in a wet coat, standing under a broken sign, looking around a small restaurant like he had not expected to find anything and had somehow found a memory. He glanced at the chalkboard menu. His eyes moved over fried catfish, pork ribs, collards, mac and cheese, sweet tea, cornbread. When he reached the word cornbread, something softened in his face. Naomi stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. Evening, she said. You trying to get out of the rain or trying to eat? The man looked at her then, and for half a second, Naomi felt she knew his face from somewhere. Television, maybe. A magazine in a waiting room. One of those interviews where rich men sat in clean studios and talked about building companies from nothing. But the face in front of her was not polished for television. It was tired, hungry, human. He smiled, small and real. "Ma'am," he said, "I was hoping I could do both." Naomi nodded toward the menu. "Kitchen's still open." "Then I'm grateful. What can I get you?" The man looked once more at the chalkboard, then back at her. "You still got those pork ribs?" "I do," Naomi said. "But if you're in a hurry, don't order them." "How long?" 12 minutes, if you want them right." The man took off his coat slowly, rain dripping from the hem onto the mat by the door. "I've waited longer than that for things that weren't half as promising," he said. Naomi studied him for one brief moment. Then she reached for her order pad. "2 sides. Mac and cheese," he said. "And collards. Cornbread comes with it." "I was hoping it would." "Sweet tea?" "Yes, ma'am." He chose table 4, the small one near the side wall. Not the best table, not the biggest, not the one where people could see him clearly from the street. He sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the room, the way people sit when they have learned to notice exits without wanting anyone to know they are noticing. Naomi wrote the order down, though she did not need to. Pork ribs, mac, collards, cornbread, sweet tea. Simple. Familiar. The kind of plate Samuel used to say could tell you everything about a kitchen. She tore off the ticket, clipped it above the stove, and reached for the best ribs she had left. She did not know yet that the man at table 4 was Marcus Ellison, founder of Ellison Freight Systems, owner of half a dozen companies, a man whose name appeared in business magazines beside words like billionaire, self-made, investor, visionary. She did not know he had grown up in a 2-room apartment in Birmingham with a mother who worked until her hands swelled. She did not know he had spent that afternoon in a glass conference room downtown, listening to men in expensive suits talk about property values in neighborhoods they could not name without looking at a map. She did not know his driver had taken a wrong turn because of road work, or that Marcus had seen the broken sign glowing through the rain and told him to pull over. All Naomi knew was that a hungry man had ordered ribs, and hungry men deserved to be fed properly. So she seasoned the meat with the same care she would have used if the room were full. She heated the pan until it was ready, not almost ready. She laid the ribs down and listened for the right sound, that deep, immediate sear that meant the meat had met heat honestly. She stirred the gravy. She checked the collards. She cut a square of cornbread from the corner because the corner was best, and because something about the man's face, when he said he had hoped cornbread came with it, made her think he knew that already. For 12 minutes, the rain kept falling. The sign kept flickering. The notebook stayed closed beside the stove, but Naomi could feel it there like a second heartbeat. 20 days. $3,500. A sick child. A dead husband's dream. And in the dining room, at table 4, a stranger waited quietly, unaware, or so Naomi thought, that he had walked into the last fragile stretch of a woman's fight to keep her whole life from being turned into something with fluorescent lights and phone cases hanging on the wall. Naomi plated the ribs, the way she had plated them for 10 years. Not faster because she was worried, not slower because she was tired, just the same steady rhythm Samuel had taught her. The kind that made food taste like it had a place to belong. She spooned the gravy carefully, not drowning the meat, letting it settle into the edges, then added a portion of mac and cheese from the center of the pan, where it held its heat best, thick and golden, and a scoop of collards that had been cooking since mid-afternoon, soft but not tired, seasoned the way people remembered. She placed the cornbread last, a corner piece still warm, a little bit of butter melting into the surface before it even touched the plate. When she picked up the dish, she paused just long enough to look at it, the way Samuel used to, like it was not just food, but a statement. Then she carried it out. Marcus looked up when she set the plate down in front of him. Not in a distracted way, not in the way people glance at something before returning to their phones, but fully, like he was present in the room and meant to stay there for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Naomi gave a small nod. "Careful, plate's hot." He smiled faintly. "Good food usually is." She turned to go back behind the counter, but something in his tone made her glance at him once more. There was no performance in it, no hint of someone trying to impress her. Just a man who sounded like he meant what he said. That was rare enough to notice. Back in the kitchen, Naomi rested her hands briefly on the counter, letting the heat from the stove press into her palms. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, softer now, but still there, like it had settled in for the night. She could hear the low murmur of the dining room, the clink of silverware, the quiet movements of people eating. It should have been a comforting sound. It usually was. Tonight, it felt thinner. She glanced again at the notebook, then deliberately turned her back on it. At table 4, Marcus picked up his fork and cut into the ribs. The knife went through clean, the meat pulling apart just enough to show it had been cooked with patience. He took the first bite without hurry, and then he stopped. Not in a dramatic way, not the kind of pause that calls attention to itself, just a small stillness, the kind that happens when something unexpected reaches you. He chewed slowly, his eyes lowering slightly, not focused on anything in the room. For a second, it looked less like he was eating and more like he was remembering. He leaned back just a fraction, exhaled through his nose, then took another bite. This time slower, more deliberate. Across the room, Mrs. Jenkins noticed it. She had seen that look before, though not on him, on her late husband, years ago, when he had come home after a long shift and taken one bite of her cooking and gone quiet like that, like the world had stopped pressing on him for just a moment. Marcus moved to the mac and cheese next. He lifted a forkful, the cheese stretching slightly before giving way, and tasted it. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not wide, not showy, just there and gone. Then he reached for the cornbread. He did not use his fork. He broke it with his hands. Naomi noticed that from behind the counter. She did not know why it mattered, but it did. People who broke cornbread like that had learned it somewhere, learned it from someone. It was not something you picked up in restaurants with white tablecloths and menus you had to squint at. Marcus ate the entire plate. Not quickly, not like he was starving, but thoroughly with attention, as if each bite deserved to be tasted the way it was meant to be tasted. He did not check his phone. He did not look around to see who might be looking at him. He simply ate. When he finished, he set his fork down and wrapped one large hand around the glass of sweet tea Naomi had brought him earlier. He took a slow sip and leaned back, looking toward the window where rain still traced quiet lines down the glass. From the kitchen, Naomi watched him the way she sometimes watched customers who seemed like they needed something more than food. Not staring, not obvious, just aware. Samuel had hung a small oval mirror near the coffee station years ago so they could see the whole dining room without turning their heads. He used to say, "A good kitchen listens with its eyes." Naomi listened now. Marcus looked around the room again, but this time slower. He took in the chalkboard menu, the uneven lettering, the places where Naomi had gone over certain words twice, to make them clearer. He looked at the photograph of Naomi and Samuel, his gaze lingering there a second longer than most people's did. He noticed the shelf by the window where a few small potted plants sat, leaves reaching toward the glass. He noticed the worn edges of the tables and the slight dip in the floor near the entrance where years of footsteps had pressed the wood down. He noticed the sign outside too, though only in reflection, the missing letter casting a faint break in the glow. He did not comment on any of it, but he saw it, and that mattered. The bell above the door rang again as one of the last customers left, pulling their coat tight around them as they stepped back into the rain. Mrs. Jenkins followed not long after, pausing by the counter. "Naomi, baby, you keep making food like that. You're gonna have folks driving from 3 counties over." Naomi smiled politely. "I'd settle for folks from this one coming out in the rain." Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand. "They will. They always come back to where they're treated right." Naomi watched her go, then glanced again at the dining room. Only Marcus remained. She wiped her hands on her apron and considered going over, asking if he wanted dessert. Sweet potato pie was still warm. It would have been the natural thing to do. But before she could move, her phone vibrated again in her pocket. She hesitated. Then she stepped into the small space behind the kitchen pass-through and answered. "Naomi Carter." "Mama, it's me again," Denise said. Her voice was tighter this time, thinner. Naomi turned her body slightly toward the wall. "What happened?" "Lena tried to get up to go to the bathroom and she almost fell. I had to catch her." Naomi closed her eyes. "Did she hit anything?" "No, but she's scared now. She keeps saying her leg feels wrong." There was a small sound in the background. Lena, trying not to cry and not quite succeeding. Naomi pressed the phone closer. "Put her on for a second." There was a rustle, then a softer voice. "Grandma." "Hey, baby," Naomi said, her voice gentler than anything else in the room. "You all right?" "It hurts," Lena whispered. I know it does. I didn't do anything, I just stood up." "That's all right. Sometimes bodies act up, even when we don't ask them to." There was a pause. "Am I going to be able to run again?" Lena asked, very quietly. Naomi's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes," she said, steady, certain. "You hear me? Yes. Okay. You just need the right doctor, and we're going to get you one." "Okay." Naomi swallowed. "Go sit down. Let your mama bring you some water. Don't try to be tough tonight. You can be tough tomorrow." A small, weak laugh. "Okay," Denise came back on the line. "Mama, I don't know how we're gonna figure it out," Naomi cut in firm. "We always do." There was silence. "Mama," Denise started again, but softer this time, like she didn't want to push too hard. "I said we're gonna figure it out," Naomi repeated. "You trust me," but in a way that said he had heard enough to understand that something real had just passed through the room. Naomi felt a brief flush of heat rise to her face. "I'm sorry," she said, straightening her apron automatically, giving her hands something to do. "That was family." Marcus nodded once. "I figured." She gestured lightly toward his empty plate. "Everything all right with the food?" He looked down at the plate, then back at her. "That might be the best meal I've had in a long time." Naomi gave a small, polite smile, the kind she had given 100 compliments before. "Well, I appreciate that." He held her gaze a second longer than most customers would have. "You made all that yourself?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Every part of it. Everything that came out on that plate came out of my kitchen." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. Then he said, "Would you mind sitting down for a minute?" Naomi blinked. She didn't sit with customers. That wasn't how she ran things. You stayed moving. You stayed working. You didn't sit. But the restaurant was empty now. The rain had settled into a softer rhythm. The dishes could wait a minute. And there was something in the way he asked. Not casual, not demanding, just respectful. Naomi hesitated for half a second longer. Then she pulled out the chair across from him at table 4 and sat down. She wasn't entirely sure why, but something told her this moment wasn't like the others. And she was right. Naomi sat across from him with her hands folded lightly in her lap, the way she had been taught to sit in church when something serious was about to be said. The chair felt unfamiliar beneath her. She could not remember the last time she had sat down in her own dining room while a customer was still inside. It made her feel exposed in a quiet way, like stepping out from behind a counter she had used for years as both a workspace and a shield. Marcus did not rush into speaking. He let the moment settle. Outside, the rain softened into a fine, steady drizzle, tapping gently against the glass. The kitchen behind Naomi hummed with low, familiar sounds, the freezer cycling, the faint click of cooling metal. It was the kind of quiet that made words matter more once they arrived. "How long have you had this place?" he asked finally. Naomi glanced toward the photograph on the wall before answering. 10 years, this past spring. "You started it yourself?" She shook her head. "No, my husband and I, Samuel Carter." She nodded toward the picture. "That's him right there." Marcus turned slightly in his chair and looked at the photograph with more attention than most people gave it. "You both look proud." "We were," Naomi said, and there was no hesitation in it. "We had no business opening a restaurant, no savings worth mentioning, no investors, no plan that would have impressed anybody in a bank. Just a lot of long days, and a stubborn belief that if we fed people right, they'd come back." "They did," Marcus said. "They still do," Naomi replied quietly. Then, after a brief pause, "Most of the time." Marcus nodded once, as if he understood the weight inside those last 4 words. "What happened to him?" he asked. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly against each other. "Stroke. 2 years ago. Just like that." She snapped her fingers once, softly. "One minute, he was telling me I'd put too much salt in the greens. Next minute..." She let the sentence trail off. It didn't need finishing. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. Naomi studied his face for a second. People said that a lot. "I'm sorry" was one of those phrases that could be handed out without much thought. But there was something in the way he said it, something steady and unhurried, that made it feel like he understood at least a part of what it meant. "Thank you," she said. Marcus looked around the restaurant again, slower this time, like he was connecting pieces. "You've been running it alone since then?" "My daughter helps when she can," Naomi said. "But she's got her own job. 2 of them, actually. So most days, it's just me and the kitchen." Marcus leaned back slightly, resting his arm on the chair. "That's a lot for one person." Naomi gave a small, practical shrug. "A lot doesn't mean impossible. It just means you don't get to waste time feeling sorry for yourself." Marcus smiled faintly at that. "Sounds like something someone taught you." Naomi let out a soft breath through her nose. Samuel had a way of saying things that stuck. Didn't always say them kindly, but they stuck. There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just full. Marcus looked back at her. "And your granddaughter?" Naomi's head lifted a fraction. "You heard that." "I wasn't trying to," he said. "But in a room this size, voices carry." Naomi held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at her hands. "Her name is Lena," She's 12. What's wrong with her? Naomi hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because saying it out loud made it more real, more fixed. They say it's something with the hip joint, she began slowly. Blood flow isn't right. Bone starts breaking down if it's not treated. She's been in pain for a while now, but it got worse these past couple months. Marcus listened without interrupting. There's a specialist, Naomi continued. Good one, from what I've been told. But good doctors cost good money. And appointments don't come cheap just because a child needs them. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. After a moment of searching, she turned the screen toward him. That's her, Naomi said. On the screen was a photograph of Lena sitting at the kitchen table, smiling wide, holding up a drawing. In the drawing, a girl with long legs and bright shoes ran across a track under a purple sky. Marcus took the phone gently, as if it was something fragile. She likes to draw, Naomi said, always drawing herself running. Even on days she can barely make it from the couch to the door. Marcus looked at the picture longer than most people would have. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a door opening quietly. She's got a good smile, he said. She does, Naomi replied, her voice softening, in a way it hadn't for the rest of the conversation. Takes after her mother in that, and her stubbornness takes after me. Marcus handed the phone back carefully. That stubbornness might be what gets her through this. Naomi slipped the phone back into her apron. That's what I'm counting on. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my mother used to work jobs when I was a kid. Naomi looked up at him. Morning shift cleaning offices, he continued. Evening shift in a hospital kitchen. She'd come home smelling like bleach and fried onions. Didn't matter how tired she was, she'd still find a way to make sure I had something warm to eat. Naomi nodded slowly. That kind of woman leaves a mark. She did, Marcus said. She used to tell me that feeding people was more than just putting food on a plate. Said it was a way of reminding them they mattered, even if the rest of the world didn't treat them like they did. Naomi let that sit for a moment. She was right. Marcus met her eyes again. That's what this place feels like. Naomi's breath caught slightly, though she did not let it show fully. Compliments about the food she could take, compliments about what the place meant. Those went deeper. You don't know this place, she said, not unkindly. No, Marcus agreed, but I know what it feels like to walk into a room and recognize something you grew up needing. That landed differently. Naomi looked at him more carefully now, not as a customer, not even as a stranger, but as someone who might understand a language she had been speaking for years without realizing it. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. You're in trouble, he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't soften the words. He just said them plainly, like a man stating the weather. Naomi's jaw tightened. That's not something you need to concern yourself with, she replied. I'm already concerned, Marcus said. That doesn't make it your business. Marcus nodded once. Fair enough. He paused, giving her room to push him away if she wanted to. Naomi looked toward the kitchen, then back at him. You had a good meal. I'm glad for that. But whatever you think you heard, I heard enough, Marcus said gently. Not everything, but enough. Naomi exhaled slowly. People hear things, and they think they understand. They don't. You're right, Marcus said. They don't. Another pause. Then he added, so, help me understand. Naomi almost smiled at that, but didn't quite get there. You asking out of curiosity, she said, or out of charity? Marcus considered that. Out of respect, he answered. That word hung in the air. Naomi studied him again. There was no pity in his face, no eagerness to play the hero, just a steady attention that felt earned somehow. She looked down at the table, then back up. "I owe $3,500 in rent," she said. 3 months behind. I've got 20 days before the man who owns this place turns it into something else, something that don't remember my husband's name." Marcus didn't react outwardly. He didn't reach for his wallet, didn't make a face. He just listened. "I've got a granddaughter who needs a doctor I can't afford," Naomi continued. "A daughter working herself into the ground, trying to keep up with bills that don't care how hard she works. And I've got a restaurant that makes enough to keep going, but not enough to catch up once you fall behind." She spread her hands slightly on the table. "That's the situation." Marcus nodded slowly, as if placing each piece where it belonged. "How much do you need to stay open?" he asked. Naomi shook her head immediately. "That's not a question you get to ask." "Why not?" "Because the answer turns this into something I don't want it to be." "And what would that be?" "A transaction," she said. "And this place isn't a transaction." Marcus held her gaze. "Neither is what I'm asking," he said. Naomi didn't respond right away. The rain had nearly stopped now. The street outside glistened under the lights. Quiet, waiting. Marcus leaned back slightly again, changing the angle of the conversation without forcing it. "Tell me something," he said. "If you didn't have to worry about the rent tomorrow, what would you do first?" Naomi blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Marcus said, "if that problem was gone in the morning, what would be the first thing you'd take care of?" Naomi opened her mouth, then closed it. She hadn't let herself think that way in months. Finally, she said, "I'd take Lena to that specialist, not the general clinic, the one who actually knows what they're doing." Marcus nodded. "And after that?" Naomi glanced toward the front window, where the broken sign cast its uneven light. "I'd fix that," she said. "Samuel would have fixed it already." Marcus followed her gaze to the reflection of the missing letter. Then he looked back at her. "You mind if I write something down?" he asked. Naomi hesitated, then reached for the order pad on the table beside them. She tore off a blank slip and handed it to him along with a pen. Marcus wrote slowly, deliberately, pressing just enough that the ink came out clean. When he finished, he folded the paper once, then again. He slid it across the table toward her. "Don't open that tonight," he said. Naomi looked at the folded paper, then back at him. "Why not?" "Because you need to sleep before you decide what to do with it," Marcus replied. "I haven't been sleeping much anyway." "That's exactly why." Naomi picked up the paper, feeling its light weight in her hand. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus stood up. "You'll see in the morning," he said. Naomi rose slowly as well, more out of instinct than intention. Marcus reached into his coat, pulled out his wallet, and placed cash on the table beside the empty plate. More than the cost of the meal. Enough to be noticed, but not enough to feel like a statement. He looked at her one last time. "My mother used to say something," he said. "She said, a woman who feeds people the way you do is doing work that matters, even on the days nobody notices." Naomi felt her throat tighten slightly. Marcus's voice softened just a fraction. "You remind me of her." He paused, letting that land. Then he added more quietly, "And I think your husband knew exactly what he was doing when he chose you." Naomi did not speak. She couldn't. Marcus gave a small nod, then turned toward the door. He stepped out into the cool night air, ducking slightly under the frame, and disappeared into the damp glow of the streetlights. The bell above the door rang once as it closed behind him. Naomi stood in the middle of the room, the folded piece of paper in her hand, the quiet of the restaurant settling around her again. For a moment, she thought about opening it right there. Her fingers even started to unfold the edge. Then she stopped. She didn't know why, but something about the way he had said it made her pause. So instead, she slipped the paper into her apron pocket, turned off half the lights, and began to clean up for the night, carrying with her a question she hadn't allowed herself to ask in a long time. What if tomorrow looked different? Naomi locked the door of Magnolia's table a little after 10 p.m., the same way she had done every night for years, turning the key twice, testing the handle once, then standing there for a second longer than necessary, as if the door itself needed reassurance. The rain had almost stopped by then, leaving the street wet and shining under the lamps. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, stepped carefully over the cracked edge of the sidewalk, and made her way to her car. The folded piece of paper sat in her apron pocket the entire drive home. She could feel it there, not heavy, not large, but present, like a thought that refused to settle. At home, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a television playing low in the living room. Denise had fallen asleep on the couch, still in her work clothes, one arm hanging loosely off the side. A blanket had been half pulled over her, the kind of tired care that said she had meant to cover herself and didn't quite finish the job. Naomi stepped in quietly, set her purse on the kitchen table, and walked to the hallway. Lena's door was slightly open. She pushed it gently and looked inside. Lena was asleep, one leg bent awkwardly under the blanket, her face turned toward the wall, her breathing uneven but steady enough. On the nightstand beside her was the drawing Marcus had seen. The purple track, the running figure, the hope drawn in crayon and stubborn imagination. Naomi stood there for a long moment. Then she stepped in, adjusted the blanket over Lena's leg, and brushed a hand lightly over her hair. "We're gonna figure it out," she whispered. She turned off the hallway light and went back to the kitchen. The folded paper came out of her apron and landed on the table. She stared at it. Her fingers rested on the edge, then pulled back. "Sleep first," he had said. Naomi let out a quiet breath, shook her head once, like she was arguing with herself, then left it there. She poured herself a glass of water, sat down for a moment, then stood again almost immediately. Sitting made the thoughts louder. That night, she didn't sleep well, not because of fear, she was used to fear, but because something new had entered the room, and she didn't yet know what to call it. At 4:37 a.m., Naomi was already awake. The house was still dark. She moved through the kitchen by memory, turning on the coffee maker, setting out the pan for cornbread, reaching for ingredients without looking. Routine was a kind of anchor, and she held on to it. The folded paper was still on the table. At 8:59 a.m., Naomi sat down. She picked it up. Her hands were steady. At 9:00 a.m., she unfolded it. There was a phone number written in large, careful digits. Below it, a short sentence. "Call this number at 9:00 a.m. I already spoke to her. No name, no explanation." Naomi stared at it. Then she reached for her phone. The number rang twice. A woman answered. "Good morning, this is Dr. Monroe's office." Naomi blinked. "Yes, I was given this number. Are you Naomi Carter?" Naomi sat up straighter. "Yes, ma'am. Please hold one moment." There was a brief pause, soft music in the background. Then a new voice came on the line, calm, clear, and practiced. "Miss Carter, this is Dr. Evelyn Monroe." Naomi swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I spoke with Marcus Ellison last night," the doctor said. "He told me about your granddaughter. Naomi closed her eyes. "I'd like to see her this week," Dr. Monroe continued. "There will be no charge for the consultation. We'll take it from there, step by step." For a moment, Naomi didn't say anything. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did. And understanding something like that takes a second to settle. "Ma'am," she said finally, her voice lower now, steadier, but carrying something underneath it. "I don't know what he told you, but I need you to understand. I'm not asking for—" "I know you're not," Dr. Monroe said gently. "That's not why this is happening." Naomi pressed her hand flat against the table. "Can you bring her in tomorrow morning?" the doctor asked. Naomi nodded before she realized she needed to speak. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, I can." "Good. We'll be ready." The call ended. Naomi sat there, her phone still in her hand, the kitchen quiet around her. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat there, breathing, letting the moment become real. Then she picked up the folded paper again and held it between her fingers. "That's one," she said quietly to the empty room. Later that afternoon, just before the lunch hour slowed into the quiet stretch between meals, a courier walked into Magnolia's table, holding a plain envelope. "Naomi Carter?" he asked. "That's me." He handed it to her, had her sign a small device, then left without another word. Naomi turned the envelope over. No personal return address, just a printed name. Ellison Community Holdings. Her fingers moved slower this time. She opened it carefully. Inside was a cashier's check. $4,000, made out to Walter Briggs. Tucked behind it was a small note, 3 words, written in the same steady hand as the paper from the night before. "For the cornbread." Naomi let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked around the restaurant, as if expecting someone to step forward and explain it, to say it was a mistake, to tell her there was a catch. There wasn't. The check stayed exactly what it was. Real. By that evening, Naomi stood across from Walter Briggs in his small office, the check placed neatly on his desk. Walter looked at it, then at her. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it," Naomi said. He leaned back in his chair slowly. "Naomi, I don't even know what to say." "You can say you'll take it," she replied. A small smile broke through his surprise. "I'll take it." He signed the receipt, slid it across the desk, and shook his head once more. "I had a feeling you'd find a way," he said. Naomi took the receipt, folded it, and placed it carefully into her purse. "I always do," she said. But this time, the words felt different, because this time she knew she hadn't done it alone. 3 days later, Lena sat in a quiet, well-lit exam room, swinging her good leg gently off the side of the table, while Dr. Monroe reviewed her chart. Naomi stood nearby, hands clasped, watching every movement, every expression, every word. Dr. Monroe spoke clearly, taking her time, explaining the condition, outlining the treatment, mapping out a path that had been nothing but a question mark just days before. "There's work to do," the doctor said, looking directly at Lena, "but I think you're going to do just fine." Lena nodded, serious, like she was accepting a responsibility. Naomi let out a quiet breath. That was 2. On the morning of October 17th, Marcus Ellison posted a photograph, not of himself, not of a business meeting, not of anything polished or prepared. The picture was taken through the front window of Magnolia's table. Inside, Naomi stood behind the counter, carrying 2 plates, her focus entirely on the work in front of her, unaware she had been photographed. The caption read, "Best ribs I've had in years. Magnolia's table, East Point. If you're anywhere close, go eat there." He had just over 5 million followers. By noon, Naomi's phone started ringing. By 1, The dining room was full. By 2, there was a line at the door. People came in, saying they saw the post. Some drove across town. Some came from farther. Some didn't even know exactly what they were ordering, just that they wanted whatever that man had eaten. Naomi moved faster than she had in months. The kitchen heated up, the rhythm returning, the orders stacking, the sounds of plates, voices, and movement filling the space again. But it wasn't easy. By the 3rd day, she ran out of ribs before dinner. By the 4th, the wait stretched longer than people were used to. A man complained. A woman asked why there weren't more staff. Naomi stood behind the counter, looked at the line, then looked back at her kitchen. And instead of breaking, she adjusted. She shortened the menu. She called Mrs. Jenkins's grandson to help serve tables. She asked Denise to take fewer hours at her second job and come in on weekends. She wrote a sign and taped it to the front door. "We cook fresh. That takes time. Thank you for waiting." Some people left, most stayed, because when the food came, it was still right. One evening, about a week after the post, Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway and looked out at the dining room. Every table was full. People were talking, laughing, eating, waiting. Lena sat at a small corner table with a workbook from the clinic, slowly moving her leg the way the therapist had shown her. Denise moved between tables with a tray, more tired than ever, but smiling in a way she hadn't smiled in months. The sign outside had been fixed that morning. Every letter now lit. Magnolia's table. Whole again. Naomi rested her hand against the door frame. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, "That's 3. Not everything was solved. Not everything was easy. But the weight had shifted. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi Carter did not feel like she was losing. She felt like she had room to stand. By early March of the following year, Magnolia's table no longer looked like a place that had once stood on the edge of disappearing. It still sat on the same narrow stretch of road in East Point, still between the laundromat and the now reopened barber shop, still with its worn wooden floor and its 12 original tables, but something about it had changed in a way that could not be measured just by numbers. The sign out front was whole again. Every letter lit clean and steady. No flicker, no gap. Magnolia's table. Inside, the dining room had grown. Not by much, but enough to matter. A second room had been opened up by knocking through the old storage space next door. Adding 8 more tables, each one set carefully, each one matching as closely as Naomi could manage, without losing the character Samuel had built into the place years before. The original counter was still there. The photograph of Naomi and Samuel still hung in its place. The oval mirror still caught the room from behind the coffee station. Nothing important had been replaced, only supported. Naomi stood in the kitchen at 7:02 a.m., the same time she had stood there for years, her hands moving through the motions of preparation, measuring, stirring, tasting. Some things did not change, no matter how much the rest of life shifted around them. On the counter beside her sat a small, round cake. It wasn't fancy, no elaborate decorations, no bakery-perfect edges. Just a simple cornbread cake, baked in a cast-iron pan, brushed lightly with honey, the top a soft golden brown with just a hint of crispness at the edges. Naomi had never been one for showy desserts. She believed food should look like itself, not like something pretending. She stepped back slightly and looked at it. "Good enough," she said quietly. On a small piece of paper beside the cake she had written, "For Mr. Marcus Ellison, from Naomi's kitchen." She had started to write something longer, something about what he had done, something about gratitude. but she had stopped herself. Gratitude did not always need a speech. Sometimes it just needed to be baked. From the dining room, she could hear the early sounds of the day beginning. Denise unlocking the front door, chairs being shifted slightly, the low murmur of the radio coming on behind the counter, and then the bell above the door rang. Naomi didn't look up right away. The bell rang all the time now. People came early. People came from far. People came because of a photograph. But after a second, something in the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift. Denise's voice, a little softer than usual. "Good morning," she said. A pause, then, "Yes, sir. She's in the back." Naomi set down the spoon she was holding. She didn't rush. She wiped her hands on her apron, adjusted the collar of her shirt, then stepped through the kitchen doorway into the dining room. Marcus Ellison stood just inside the entrance, looking around. He wasn't dressed any differently than the first night. Simple coat, dark pants, nothing that called attention to itself. But this time, the room noticed him, not because he asked it to, but because word had traveled, because stories had a way of doing that. Naomi stopped a few feet away from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You're late." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "Late for what?" "For the best cornbread in the city," she replied, her tone steady, but lighter than it had been the night they met. Marcus smiled. "Well," he said, "I'd hate to miss that twice." Naomi nodded toward a table. "Sit down. You eating the same thing, or you planning to surprise me?" "I wouldn't take that risk," Marcus said as he pulled out the chair. "Same as last time." Naomi turned toward the kitchen. "Then don't move." From the corner of the room, Lena watched him. She was sitting at one of the smaller tables, a notebook open in front of her, one leg stretched out slightly the way the therapist had instructed. She had grown a little more confident in the way she held herself, even if the movement still came carefully. Naomi returned a few minutes later with the plate. Ribs, mac and cheese, collards, cornbread, and a glass of sweet tea. She set it down in front of him the same way she had that first night. No extra flourish, no hesitation, just right. Marcus looked at the plate, then up at her. "You didn't change anything," he said. Naomi shook her head. "Didn't need to." He picked up his fork and took a bite, and just like before, he paused, just for a second. Then he nodded once, almost to himself. "Still the same," he said. Naomi pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without waiting to be asked this time. They sat in a quiet that felt familiar now, not empty, just understood. Marcus glanced around the restaurant again, taking in the changes, the added room, the steady flow of customers beginning to fill seats. "You've been busy," he said. Naomi followed his gaze. "Busy don't scare me," she replied. "Losing everything does." Marcus nodded slightly. "How's your granddaughter?" he asked. Naomi's expression softened. "She's walking better," she said. "Still got work to do. Therapy twice a week, exercises every day, complains about it like she's supposed to." Marcus glanced toward Lena. She noticed and gave a small wave. He returned it. Naomi watched that moment, then looked back at Marcus. "She asked me last week if she could start running again this summer," Naomi said. "And what did you tell her?" Marcus asked. "I told her we'd take it one step at a time," Naomi replied. Then after a pause, "But I didn't say no." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's a good answer." Naomi reached into her apron and placed the small cake on the table between them. "I made this," she said. Marcus looked at it, then at her. "For me?" he asked. You don't see anybody else sitting here, she said. He let out a quiet laugh. What's the occasion? He asked. Naomi shrugged lightly. Heard it was your birthday. Marcus looked at her for a moment, surprised. I didn't mention that, he said. You didn't have to, Naomi replied. People talk, and I listen. Marcus studied the cake again. You didn't have to do this, he said. Naomi shook her head. Yes, I did, she said. Maybe not for you, but for me. Marcus didn't respond right away. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair. That night, she said slowly, you gave me 3 things. Marcus looked up. You gave me a number that got my granddaughter in front of a doctor who knew what she was doing. You gave me a check that kept this place from turning into something it was never meant to be. And you gave me a push I didn't know I needed. Marcus's expression didn't change much, but his attention sharpened. Naomi continued. But that's not what stayed with me. Marcus tilted his head slightly. What did? He asked. Naomi glanced toward the photograph of Samuel. Something you said, she replied. Marcus waited. Naomi looked back at him. You said he knew what he was doing when he chose me. The words settled between them. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that, she went on. I thought I was holding on to this place for him. Turns out, I was holding on to it because he trusted me to. Marcus nodded slowly. My mother used to say something like that, he said. She said the people who leave things behind aren't always leaving a burden. Sometimes they're leaving proof that they believed you could carry it. Naomi let out a quiet breath. Well, she said, I'm still carrying it. Marcus looked around the restaurant again. Looks like you're doing more than that. Naomi allowed herself a small smile. Some days, she said, other days, I'm just trying not to burn the cornbread. They both laughed softly. From the front door, the bell rang again. More customers stepped in. The room filled with voices, movement, the sound of plates, the steady rhythm of a place alive. Naomi stood up. I've got work to do, she said. Marcus nodded. I figured you would. She paused for a moment, then added, You come back again. You don't need to wait for an invitation. Marcus picked up a piece of cornbread, breaking it in half with his hands. I wouldn't wait anyway, he said. Naomi turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her steps steady, her shoulders straight. Marcus watched her go for a moment, then looked down at the plate in front of him, at the cake, at the room around him. Outside, the sign glowed clear and whole. Inside, Magnolia's table moved forward, one plate at a time. And somewhere between a rainy night, a folded piece of paper, and a woman who refused to let go of what mattered, a life that had once been slipping quietly toward loss had found its way back to something stronger, not because it had been saved, but because it had been seen. And sometimes that is where everything begins.